Okay, first of all, I'd like to ask the panel members to come to the stage. We decided to stand up during the entire panel because otherwise if we sit down, the people in the back will not be seeing us from here. So this is going to be a panel discussion about concerns of opening research data. And most of the people in this room, I guess, share the idea that open data and open science is good, and that's something that we should promote, and that public access to research data has numerous benefits and advantages for the scientific community and the wider society. While this mandated public data archiving is becoming kind of a norm in the science, we still have lots of research data that are not published or not made openly accessible. So it seems that we scientists and the scientific community, by and large, we are not fully ready for opening data. Just from the mere fact that most of our research data are not either open, or if open, they are archived in a way that partially or entirely prevent the reuse. So these are the issues that we are going to discuss. We have something like 25 minutes time, so very tight schedule. So I will skip the introduction of the two of the panel members that have already been introduced to you, Mikael and Niklas, but then we have a pleasure to have Emma Vatka, who is an animal ecologist and postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Biology in the University of Oulu. And then we have Santeri Laurila, who is a PhD student at the Helsinki Institute of Physics working on particle physics. So today we do so that each of the panel members will first tell what she or he thinks is the main or prime obstacle for opening data and what should be done in order to remove that obstacle. And I guess because one of the ideas here is to give opportunity to younger generation scientists to speak up and present their opinions, I will give first opportunity to Emma, please.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emma Vatka. I come from the University of Oulu. I work in a research group that maintains long-term programs for collecting data of demographic data of breeding birds. So the data at the moment is not open access, or part of it is, but mostly it is not. But this does not mean that we would not be willing to share the data. It is a common practice in our field that data is available upon request. So researchers ask us for our data, and we usually reply positively and share our data. And this culture is based on mutual benefits. So we share our data, and we are able to access their data as well. And when the data is used, also the data provider is mentioned as an author in the publications. So we get benefits from sharing the data. In a way, I'm here I have a dual role here. On one hand, I'm a new generation scientist who would definitely benefit from open access of the research data. And on the other hand, I'm working in a research group that has long-term data that is not easy to push open access. One of my main concerns, I listened to Sverker Helmgren's presentation, and he presented many issues that researchers have. Well, they have negative attitudes toward opening research data, and I recognized many of those. One of the main issues is that, at least in our research field, collecting data, producing data is not cost-free. It takes a lot of efforts to produce the data. It takes time and also it takes money. So some researchers are paying the costs of producing data, and then they are asked to put it open so that others can benefit from it. And I think many researchers in our field do not find this fair, that some are paying the cost and others are benefiting from it. My solution for this problem, well, I mentioned mutual benefits. So if researchers who provide the data could be given benefits from it, for example, co-authorship in papers where the data is used, that would be a solution, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Emma. We move on, and then we hopefully have time for discussion and questions from the audience. But next, Santeri, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm an experimental particle physicist. I'm a PhD student in the University of Helsinki. And I'm in a kind of fortunate position in here because in the field of high energy physics, we have well-established, I would say, open access policies and institutions already existing. Simply because we are doing this kind of very basic research which is publicly funded, and that means that in a way we have an obligation to some point to make the data public to benefit everybody. So I'm working for the CMS collaboration, which is a collaboration of 3,000 members approximately. And we have actually people who are full-time working only for publishing the data and making sure that it gets to be public, and we also, all our publications are open access and so on. So I don't, as a researcher, I don't have to myself really much fight for this or anything. But the problems that have been mentioned here are, some of them are really relevant for us. And of course one is, I would also like to talk a bit about this like effort of gathering the data. And of course the researchers who keep up the experiments and spend lots of time and money on gathering the data want to get their hands to the data first. And this is also my solution, basically, that and the solution that has been adopted by the large collaborations at CERN, that let's give a few years, let's say, for the people who have paid for the, like mostly the institutions that have paid for the gathering the data and done all the work to play with the data and analyze it, and then after that let's make it public to everybody, so that basically any one of you can now download data from the particle physics experiments from 2010 or 11 and learn how to play with it and see if you find out something interesting. Another good point here is that the data itself doesn't help very much, but you have to know how to use it, how to interpret what's in there, what were the conditions where the data was taken, what kind of corrections you should use. So all of this very different metadata is also needed. And also for this, I think, it's kind of optimal to, you have kind of optimal time window to make the data open access, so that the researchers are not very busy anymore working on the data themselves. They understand it, they know how it should be used, and they can help in making it open access, so that all this metadata will be correctly added. But at the same time, people still remember how this data was taken, what was done at the time of data taking, and that's also important. Yes, and luckily also I guess that birds are not very concerned about their privacy, and also protons and electrons are not very concerned about their privacy, so that makes life easy for us.
Okay, thanks Santeri for providing a different perspective from physics, and now we move on, and it's Mikael's turn.
Yeah, well, it's very complicated to say, you know, what is the main obstacle for making data open. I think there are many different things. But one thing I would like to elaborate on, which I touched upon a bit in my presentation, is related to training and information and knowledge that our researchers should have about these issues. So this meeting I had with Markus Hergaard from Biosustain, which is a research center, a huge research center at DTU. He works in, he says like there is not a big problem if you have a clear strategy. And that's the point, that you have to have some kind of thoughts about what you're doing when it comes to when can you share your data, when are you working on a patent, when are you collaborating with industry. The problem is sometimes that it just gets like black and white. So like we have the tech transfer guy, we have the patent guys who say like, yeah, no, nothing can be disclosed, we never know what happened, it could be a potential patent or something like that. And they go out to talk to our researchers and they try to say like, you should be really, really careful, you should be really careful all the time. And then we come from the library or for the research data management office and say like, you have to make your data open as well. So we have to have a more coherent way of discussing these things and saying, well, it's not black and white. And I like the way that was presented today earlier in one of the presentations saying, open science is an ideal and it will never be perfect. And that we have to remember all the time. So don't be sort of an open science purist, balance the different stakeholder, balance the different interests that there is in this field. And then I think we can succeed making as much as possible open.
Thanks, Mikael. And finally, Niklas, please.
Thank you. Yes, maybe the biggest issue, I think, is the cultural change currently. But if we go past that and we get the research community and we get the researchers get their carrots, so they want to do this. I think after that, the fair part of it, there's a problem there. We don't want the data to end up in black holes. We need to find them. We need to access them. They need to be interoperable and reusable. And the curation of the data, I think, is extremely important there. And there I see a large gap, at least in the life science research communities. Describing your data in a way that's interoperable, not only for a human, but for a machine. There are so many data sets out there, and they're so big, it has to be machine transferable. This data space has to work across by a computer. And for that, things have to be described in a concise way. And in biology, there are over 600 standards, controlled vocabularies or ontologies. Currently, the researchers working on the floor, they're not really interested in this. And when they are exposed with it, they just shake their head. So there's a gap there that is about education and training a lot. But also I think about lowering thresholds and having these persons that can help researchers navigate it. We've heard the term data stewards mentioned, and I think that's extremely important for this to work. And I think Bernd Mons of the Open European Science Cloud, he claims that Europe needs 500,000 data stewards. Maybe a bit much, but lower that figure by 10. 50,000. I mean, and we need a shift. This money, it has to come, money has to be taken from somewhere, so there has to be there for this to work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. From these introductory notes, it seems obvious to me that there are definitely differences between scientific fields, so that in the end, perhaps we do not need to come up with one set of rules and procedures for open science and open data, but kind of a field-specific, or as Mikael said, perhaps department and faculty-specific strategies for opening data and doing open science. Now we have some 10 minutes time for discussion, so I will give possibility for the audience to ask questions.
I give the other the opportunity still to think while I'm speaking here. I think I was listening to, I was preparing my question and I was listening to the speakers or the panelists, and I think I can summarize, because some of the things came up, not the same by everybody, but you could cover most of it. And I think the first thing is that a data management plan is not a static one. I mean, a data management plan cannot be done only in the beginning of a project. It's something which needs to be corrected during a project and after the project. The other thing is that the data management cost ecology isn't really there. There isn't really clearly defined who is going to pay this, and the research community still is very reluctant to put any money into it. So that's another thing which has to be resolved. And the third thing is, I don't know if Jean-Claude is still here, but he's using the slogan or saying that the researchers can't write metadata. The researchers can be paid to write crappy metadata. So who is going to write this metadata? Because it's definitely not the researchers. It could be the data practitioners, but we are lacking the 500,000 of them, so I don't know. So in a way, the discussion which we are having here is too much circulating around the individual researchers themselves, because I don't think the individual researchers themselves is the main core or the main thing in reuse of data. We have to create some other supporting platforms or other supporting means, because the researchers themselves will not solve this problem. Thank you.
Who would like to comment on that?
Well, I agree on that, of course, doing new stuff needs funding. I mean, Ivo said today, I mean, sometimes it's also opportunity cost. It's a question whether do you want the external funding from Horizon 2020? If they have requirements, you have to invest into doing data management. I know it's a shift of way most researchers think about these things, but if you want strategically to win the money, you have to do the best possible way you can do data management in different projects. When I think about the discussion we had here today, I mean, maybe from the two younger researchers, maybe it was more sort of a personal thing, but I think the other things we've discussed here about concerns about providing access to data was not so much personal things, it's more structural things about how universities think about what's important for them. And I think, I mean, this open science discussion, the level it is at today is quite new. I mean, in Denmark, for the last 15 years, we've been just discussing, like, how can we make research into value for society, jobs, money, this kind of thing. That's been the main issue. Actually, my office is being moved before Christmas. I was sitting next to our vice director, but now I'm being moved down to near the library because the vice director wants to have the business developer up next to him. So, I mean, even though we have the discussion here, we think open science is very important here today, it's not quite at the same height of interest at the universities yet.
Yes, I completely agree that the main problems here are organizational, and we should concentrate on that. And it's like, of course, it's very important that what open data-minded researchers can do themselves, but of course it's very limited also because of the nature of how the academic world works nowadays. So usually it consists of short projects. And when you change your project, you change maybe if not the institute, you change what you work with, and you change your computers, and the data should be stored safely somewhere in the, let's say, in the upper level or completely different part of organization. So that it's not dependent on whether that researcher who once did the study is available to help with the data or anything. So I agree completely about this.
I think you're really right at bringing out the data management plans and that they're not static things. And I think we need to offer something to the researchers, a solution to their problems. Offer them data management planning as a part that would make the project management easier. Because if you do things right from the beginning and do it regularly, your research would run easier. You will remember months down the line what you actually did, and so on. So I think if we can offer such a product, if you want to call it that, that is something that the researcher would want because it helps his project. I think that's a way forward.
And one question here.
Well, I said it early on that I think we made the researchers' mission quite impossible, because now we want to press this open science onto them. We should make the university leadership accept that if you really go for openness, which is a good idea, I believe, then you should really think through whether you should care so much about the ranking, if the ranking parameters are not changed, whether you should employ people in a different way with a different focus than just Nature papers and so on. They should really move in there, otherwise there's no help for the scientists. I think they're pretty good stories. I mean, the Hubble data, more papers are written on the Hubble data by people who not made the data, but other people made the data. That the sharing there is really bang for the bucks. I also know colleagues of Niklas that were very proud that their tools and their for reading this enormous amount of data, their tools for reading that are downloaded much more than their Nature and Science papers. They're really proud, so maybe we should have an age index for the data rather than a co-authorship each time somebody uses the data. But it needs to cost money, first of all, and it needs to come from somewhere, and that's from the top. If you leave it on the scientists to change the way they usually go about it, it's unfair, because they are not going to get funding, promotion, or anything.
Okay, it seems that we largely agree that this opening science and opening data is institutional problems, and we should have institutional solutions. But the solutions might differ between institutions. Any further questions, comments? Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate, but it's there are so many things in the air. But while there are scientists or researchers in the audience, I would like to see a bit of reflections on, because I think before we can implement what we have been discussing during the day, we need a persistent object identification system. I'm talking about object identification system, because we don't have that for the time being. If we now request the scientists, the researchers to put their data and software somewhere, there is really no mechanism we are going to find them in 2 years' time, because that's missing. That component is missing in the system. And somehow I don't really hear any worried voices or any comments about this, because sometimes we compare the situation with the data with the development of the internet in the 70s. And before we agreed to start using TCP/IP to really start flushing the bits in the network, it was very, very complicated. And we still lack some of the basic components. So any views on this?
Okay, there was a question, so Mika.
Well, I don't know how many of you have heard Bernd Mons, because basically that's what he's saying, right, with the European Open Science Cloud, is that we have to learn from from the internet and from having these rules of engagement. That's basically what we want. We don't want to make standards, like 600 different standards, and that we should have like a central organization looking at different standards. We have to do like very simple rules of engagement for anyone who wants to participate in an open science infrastructure. I have no idea how that can happen at all, but I just heard that's what he said, and if someone can make that happen, I would be happy, but so that's my only...
Okay, one final question. We are running out of time, but one is there. Okay, good.
Thank you. My name is Paul Sørgaard. I work in the Norwegian Ministry for Research and Education, but before that I was an information system scientist, and it's actually the information system scientist who starts thinking now, because really I think what you were discussing a while ago is the issue of how to mobilize individuals here, how to motivate them and their incentives and all of that. And I think that's really the way to go, because this is an enormously difficult task to mobilize lots of researchers who are quite individualistic, and they have their careers and all of that. And if you're going to give them something that is sort of negative or difficult for their careers, you won't make it. So the only way to do this is to turn this around and make it attractive for those who are going to make and curate and maintain these data. And really, I'd like to ask you a question. Have any of you 5 talked to the information systems researchers in your institutions about these issues?
I can reply, I have not.
Not about these issues.
I've discussed it with the DTU Compute, which is a department for computer science. Those I've discussed it with, but they are pretty, far-sighted when it comes to this open science and reproducibility of science. They are working on how can we store software, code, data, everything. They're really inspired by the whole discussion you find in Nature about the whole reproducibility crisis. So, they are working on that. But the thing is, you cannot just copy one thing from one department for one discipline to another discipline. That's the problem. What we can do is that we can, at the university, we can start discussions for all the departments and individually in each department. How can we do it within your field? That's the approach we are doing at DTU, is that we have a very general data management policy, which basically says data have to be fair, and if it can be openly available, it should be openly available, but some other things as well. But that has to be implemented locally in the departments, and we have to have the discussion. And again, it's not going to be perfect, but we have to try. That's important. I've worked together with a lot of people who think that they can build the perfect system, and that's difficult.
I think the problem is you have to provide the carrot, a really juicy carrot. And I think maybe just to get good academic merit or credit for publishing data and showing that it is a quality data that you publish, that's what's going to change it. And that funders and universities see to this, and not as much as how many high impact papers you. I think that's a very strong driver if we can get to that.
Yes, just a short comment. So actually this discussion, to me, this is quite similar to like we would be discussing that how to ensure that the level of teaching is good in universities. Teaching is something that is usually seen as harmful for your research and harmful for your scientific career and so on. But there are indeed universities which have managed to make the incentives such that they can have people who have a strong pedagogical background and strong scientific background in their specific field. And maybe similarly to the question, who are the people, we will need people who are strong in their own fields and have this broader data management background as well.
Okay, perhaps we can end up. Okay.
Just you said about they have a big juicy carrot. I think it's very important because we meet researchers now and then who actually seen the light. They want to make the things open. They're asking for help. And we're all waiting for like to have the big carrot and have all the infrastructures, and we can't help them. We're losing them. They can be the future advocates, right? So jump in it, right?
Okay, now it's time to end this panel discussion. I would like to thank all the panel members for this discussion, and perhaps we can end up by perhaps with these fine, wise words and also the comments on the board that we need to change metrics. How do we measure people performance in our universities? That's the way to create incentives. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Mönkkönen, and thank you for I'm also thanking all the panelists